The show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living, or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hello and welcome to the Thinking Tree series, where we invite economists from all over the world to share their views on the current economic affairs. Today we have with us Mr. Amit Basole. He is Associate Professor of Economics at Azim Premji University. He also has previously taught at Bucknell University, Lewisburg, and University of Massachusetts, Boston. We are really delighted to have you here with us today, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So today we are going to talk about employment-related issues, specifically in India. And from that perspective, the very first question that comes up in the mind of youngsters and young economists is usually that how does a country like India with a large workforce and population move towards great productivity or greater productivity without putting a lot of people out of work?
Yes, you've exactly started with the right question, and it's a very hard question to answer, as you can imagine. One way to understand this question is to look at historical experiences of other countries and ask, what do we know about other parts of the world where similar problem has been solved? Of course, very few countries are as large as India. China is the obvious one that comes to mind. But there are other smaller countries that were equally dense in terms of population. For example, South Korea, although it's a small country, it was a very poor country, as poor as India, and densely populated. Or you can think of other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam and so on. They're all at different stages of solving the same problem. And what we know is that in all of these countries, the movement of people from agriculture, which is generally what people tend to do in poor countries, most people are employed in agriculture, to other kinds of economic activities, was the most important thing for increasing productivity. And most of the focus has been traditionally on manufacturing. Right. So using labor-intensive manufacturing industries as a way to draw people away from lower productivity, informal activities towards higher productivity, modern activities. Very few countries have managed this transition successfully. I gave the example of South Korea, which is a success story in some ways. Vietnam has been attempting the same thing. China has succeeded to an extent. India has its own very specific problems that we can discuss in the next few minutes. But India is at the very initial stage of this journey. And the big question is, can we do in manufacturing what other countries have done before us? Or is India different? Do we need to think differently about solving the employment problem in our country?
Right. Absolutely. That's very true. Because you have mentioned about manufacturing sector, and we know that India has struggled since a very long time, although we started off with along with the phase of the industrial revolution that was happening around the world, still we lagged behind somewhere. And so in that perspective, what should actually drive the job creation that we require? Should it be like the large firms that already have existed, or the smaller ones, or the businesses, the entrepreneurs or startups, or the government?
Right. And I think the answer has to be all of the above, because as you said in your very first question, the order of the challenge in India's case is very large. Our workforce currently is around 500 million people, and that is with a low labor force participation rate. So if labor force participation were to increase, then the workforce would also correspondingly increase. So we are talking about a large number of people to find gainful employment. All the things that you mentioned, which is direct employment by the government, of course, has to be part of the issue. And we can think about what type of employment that should be. But it cannot be the whole answer, because the government cannot employ such a large number of people. Yeah. So the private sector is very important. In the private sector, there is a role to be played by small firms, a very critical role to be played by small and medium firms, of which there are thousands upon thousands of such firms. So if we enable them to expand, and scale up their operations, then the amount of job creation that can happen through this SME sector is very large. And that includes not only startups, what you mentioned, but also existing firms, which are not technically speaking startups. They may have been there for a few years, but they have faced some barriers to growth.
Yes.
They are not able to expand. So there's a very important role for policy to decide what to do to create a favorable climate for these firms to expand.
Absolutely right. So even when we talk about these small scale industries or firms, or those firms who have started just last couple of years and they have benefited out of their scale of operations, still we find that most of this sector is quite informal and has the problem of no job security. And in the past we have seen that whenever there was a specific employment, or anybody or anyone from the workforce applied for any job, they would always stick to that job security position. And now we do not have it, and it's like consistently decreasing. So are we really cognizant about the fact that we don't have enough high quality jobs, or is there some other broader policy level that we have to achieve?
Yeah, so now we are talking about the quality of employment, which is as important as the quantity aspect that we were discussing earlier, and the two are very closely connected to each other. So let me explain what I mean. So one of the main reasons why job quality is poor, meaning that jobs are insecure, working conditions are bad, there is no dignity at work, or wages are low. There are many reasons. All of this, in large part, is because the number of workers who are willing to work is much larger than the number of employment opportunities. Right? So people are willing to work, they're willing to bargain and get the standards down because they want some work. Now, if the quantity of employment is increased, if policy is able to create a large number of jobs in the private and public sector, then the number of workers who are fighting for one job decreases. And that means that the bargaining position of workers improves. And as a result of that, working conditions improve, wages improve, and so forth. This is what we have seen in many countries. So the quantity of employment is a key factor in determining the quality of employment. Of course, beyond that, labor laws and other kinds of legal means are also important. But in the absence of a large number of jobs being available, laws by themselves cannot guarantee decent work.
Absolutely. So in this context itself, I just wanted to know from your opinion, what would be those prime things that the small businesses or those growing businesses can do now so that they can better the quality of jobs that they are offering to the young blood?
So a very critical part of this I've already mentioned, which is on the number of workers side, right? If workers are fewer, then firms are forced to offer them better conditions to compete for workers. But equally important is a second aspect of this, which is that the small firms themselves need to be productive enough that they have enough profits left after taking care of their workers well. What happens in the informal sector often is that because there is so much competition among firms also, not just among workers, but even among firms, that no single firm has enough margins to be able to expand while also paying their workers well and taking care of their needs. So we have to focus on getting productivity up in the small scale sector, in the informal sector, which will enable the small firm entrepreneurs to better take care of their workforce. So both of these things have to come together. The strengthening of the bargaining position of workers through availability of jobs, and the improvement of productivity in this sector, which creates the conditions for better wages and better job quality.
When we talk from the perspective of global employment situation, we have currently seen there are articles flooded in the newspapers since not a very long time that there are global pressures and US Fed's expecting a kind of a recession, and there are layoffs which are on the top of headlines, and there are some big companies who have mentioned about layoffs in the past few weeks as such. So how do you think that is going to impact the job market in India?
See, we have to separate out some kinds of business cycle related issues that keep coming up, right? In a capitalism as a system is prone to these fluctuations, we know, and there are booms and busts that happen. However, in the Indian case, beyond the booms and bust cycle, there is a very important structural element that we have been talking about, which is that in the first place, we don't have enough people who are in the modern sector, which is affected by the business cycle strongly. Right? So the corporate sector in India, for example, employs a very small percentage of the workforce, less than 10%. Most of the workforce is in the agricultural sector, in the informal sector, and so on. It's not that they are unaffected by business cycles. That's not what I'm saying. But the problem that we are solving, it goes beyond the problems of recessions and so forth, and is a long run issue of a creating of adequate number of jobs in the non-farm sector. I think that is the first order challenge.
Right.
Then there are other issues such as the recession and so on that you mentioned.
Right. And I think you mentioned it very correctly, especially for all those students who are from non-economics background, who consistently give competitive examinations, and they do not understand the connection between how a business cycle is going to actually be a part of the game. And it's always going to, like, after one decade, again, you will hear some layoffs and some recession and situations like these. So that was a very good insight from your part. So, and in continuation to this, I think my last question to you for the segment would be, how can we see the future of job stability in India?
If by job stability, we mean a relatively secure, and not only secure, but a decently paying job, then we have to go back to where we started, which is how do we create the conditions under which an adequate number of jobs can be created in the first place, such that the surplus labor that we have, which is a large number of people who are forced to self-employment because they have no other options, how can they find a place in the system from where then we can build to greater productivity, better working conditions, and so on. So if you think from a policy perspective, then the policy challenge is to create the right mix, what you mentioned earlier, which is what part of the solution will be government hiring, what part of the solution has to come from manufacturing, how important are exports, what are our export strengths, can we depend on services such as IT BPO to expand further and create jobs, or are they not going to be significant players in solving the job problem? Right? But maybe we can expect IT BPO to be an important driver for export revenue. Right? So maybe unlike the Southeast or the East Asian countries where the export revenue as well as the job creation came through manufacturing, maybe in India's case, there is a division, which is that export earnings come from IT BPO and other services, while jobs come from manufacturing, but they are not export-oriented jobs because we are not competitive in the export market for manufacturing. Right? So we have to think creatively about this. Maybe India is one of those countries where a lot of service-oriented activities are really what are going to drive job creation, while manufacturing will remain limited in its scope. That's possible.
Right. So, you have had a great experience yourself in teaching a lot of youngsters and young economists. So, sir, what would you tell the economists and all those students who are learning the subject and studying various parts of it, of how to achieve that skill or employability, so that they can be a better part of this whole employment game in India?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we can start with some very practical things. In these days, an economics graduate or a postgraduate is expected to know a lot of practical data handling skills, for example.
Yes.
How to code, how to analyze big data, so on, right? Where you can use various statistical packages. So making sure that you are coming out with some basic data skills is become, I would say, a non-negotiable part of being an economist. But that is not enough. It is also very important to connect what you are learning in the classroom to what you're seeing out in the world. After all, what you're learning in the classroom is only useful if it makes you able to make sense of the world outside. Right? When you're going to go out in your job, people are going to ask you to do things which are practical challenges of being out there in the world. Your intuition has to be sound as to what is the important question here.
Right.
What do I pay attention to? What is incidental? What is only distraction? And what is the real problem? Those are we do this in daily life all the time, but we don't make that connection often into the theory that we learn in the classroom.
True.
So push your professors to make those connections. Okay, you are teaching me these things. You're telling me the economy works this way, that way. Can you point me to examples out in the world where I can notice such behavior? If you're telling me that microeconomic agents are utility maximizing, they do these various things. That's what theory says. What should I look for in people's behavior that tells me that they are doing something like this? Right? When you push your professors, they will also, help you to do those things. That will make you an economist who's trained beyond just the rote learning, and will give you a practical dimension.
Absolutely. That was a delight talking to you, sir. It was a really great experience, especially the students who and the young economists who are a part of the audience base that we have. It was really, really amazing for you to be here and share your insights about the current economic affairs.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
And all the best for your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.